In this N8N course, you'll master N8N by building this, your own AI WhatsApp assistant that saves you hours by doing research or building app ideas in Lovable from just a voice note. So I've broken this N8N tutorial down into 10 stages, starting with the basics and building up. So this is actually beginner friendly, and that by the end, you'll be confident using 30 of the most important nodes. So we'll begin by building an AI agent step by step. You can build along with me, or you can get all of the workflow files in the description below that you can import into N8N. So after you've built an agent, you'll give it some extra powers or tools. Next, you'll connect it to a spreadsheet so you can track all of your research in one place. You'll then add in a prompt improvement agent, which will take your prompts and make them 10 times better. From there, we'll connect it to WhatsApp and Google Docs, set up voice to text so you can send it voice notes, and we'll set up something called RAG that will make your AI assistant 100 times more useful and personalized. And in the final lesson, we'll connect it to an app builder so you can build websites and apps from just sending it a voice note. Jenkins, can you build me a to-do list app? But we'll start here with what is N8N? So N8N is a workflow automation tool that's notable for 3 reasons. First, you can build powerful AI and AI agent workflows with no code. Second, it's affordable to self-host, which I'll come back to in just a moment. And third, and this is N8N's main differentiator, nodes can be connected in a non-linear way, not just in a simple this then that sequence. This will become a little bit clearer as we build, but it's what sets N8N apart from tools like Zapier or Make, and it enables you to build powerful workflows that just wouldn't be possible in other tools. Now, I mentioned self-hosting N8N. So with N8N, you can either use the cloud version where you pay about $30 a month. This is easy, it's not a bad option if you're just starting out. But if you're willing to put aside about 3 minutes, you can self-host N8N, which will cut your costs down by 67%. Now, if you're technical, I've compared 7 different N8N hosting options in this video, but the short answer is that for 99% of people, the cheapest, easiest, and most reliable way to self-host N8N is on Hostinger. And if you go to this URL, it will pre-configure and install N8N for you. I think there's a discount too, so it ends up being around about $7 a month to have N8N up and running. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a self-hosted N8N instance for this tutorial. So from this page, I'm going to click Choose Your Plan and select a KVM1. This is the cheapest plan, and we can always upgrade it later if we need, but the specs on this are absolutely fine for getting up and running. So we'll click Choose Your Plan, and from this page, I'm just going to change the amount that I pay from 24 months down to 1 month. Check the server location is as close to me as possible, which it is, and that N8N is pre-selected as our operating system. This just means once we get into our account, everything's going to be pre-installed for N8N. We don't have to do anything. So we'll click Continue, enter our payment information, and then we're going to get redirected to a page like this. And everything is now done. If we click Manage App, will be taken straight into N8N. So I'm just going to go ahead and create an account, click through all of these. And if you're using the self-hosted version of N8N, there are some features you can't access until you've entered a license key. So you'll get an email like this with your license key. If you click Activate, it'll enable those features. So let's just go back to the main page. And there are 2 ways you can get started in N8N. You can either start from scratch, which we're going to do in a minute, or you can start from a template. And I want to point this out because the templates available from the community are incredible. So almost anything you're trying to build in N8N has already been built before. So this is a really good way to get inspiration for how to build a workflow. So say you're trying to build a YouTube workflow, you can see examples of how people have built these things. And oftentimes you can just copy it straight into your account. But first, let's go back to that main page, click Start from Scratch, and I'm going to explain 7 important concepts in N8N. So this is the main canvas where you build your workflows, and you build workflows in N8N by connecting nodes together. Now you can think of nodes as basically just building blocks. So if you click Add First Step, you can see it's asking us for a trigger. A trigger is a type of node that starts a workflow. So I'm going to select the manual trigger node. This just means if I click this, it's going to start our workflow. Then if I click the little plus icon, you can see it's asking what I want to happen next. And we can choose from 7 different types of nodes. So we've got AI nodes, things like AI agents. We're going to be building one of these in a moment. We've got actions in apps. So this is where you can connect different apps to N8N. So for example, you want to add a row in a Google Sheet, you can do that here. Then we've got data transformation, things like filtering, removing duplicates. We'll be using quite a few of these today. Then we have flow nodes. Then we have our core nodes. We'll be using a few of these, things like HTTP requests. And then lastly, we have human in the loop nodes, where we can pause our workflow, send ourselves a message on Slack or WhatsApp or Telegram, and then wait for a response before the workflow continues. So those are our 7 types of nodes. There are 2 more concepts I still want to cover, but it'll be easy to explain them with a workflow. So we're going to start our first lesson and build a really simple AI workflow where we send a chat message into OpenAI and then get the response sent back via chat. So we're going to go to the canvas and I'm going to remove this trigger and we're going to add a new chat trigger. So you just type in chat and we'll select that. We can click out of that for the minute. Then we're going to click on the plus icon and we're going to add an AI node. And I'm going to add a OpenAI node here. And the action I want to add is message a model. Now, if you're using the cloud version of N8N, I believe you get some free AI credits here that you can just connect with. But if you're using the self-hosted version of N8N, you're going to need to connect your API key here. This is really simple to do. You just click create new credential. You go to this page, click create a new secret key. You give it a name, click create secret key, and then you pop that key in here. Click save, and that should now be working. Now we're going to need to select an AI model. At this point, it doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to go for GPT 3.5 and we'll configure the rest of that in just a moment. Then we're going to come out and we're going to click the plus here, and we're going to select a respond to chat action. So essentially what we've got going on here is we're going to send a chat message, it's going to post it to ChatGPT, and the response will then be sent back to us. But this workflow isn't going to work yet because we haven't yet mapped the data between these three nodes. We've connected them with these arrows, but that only tells N8N where the data should flow, not what data to send between the nodes. So in order to set that up, we need to do some field mapping. And this is the sixth concept that I wanted to cover because it's incredibly important in N8N. So to illustrate this point, if we click into the OpenAI node, you can see we've got this option to send a prompt to OpenAI. Basically the same as if you go to ChatGPT, you can enter a prompt, but it's currently blank. Whereas what we want to send in here is the message that we send our chat trigger. In order to get some data that I can map, I need to first send a message to our chat trigger. So I'm going to click open chat and I'm going to ask it, why do Brits drink so much tea? Now, the only reason I'm doing this is just to get some data in there that I can manually map. So if we now click on the OpenAI node, you can see I've got this input data. And what I can do is I can click this chat input, why do Brits drink so much tea? And I can just drag that over into the prompt. So now when I run this OpenAI node, if I click execute step, you can see that it's actually asking ChatGPT why Brits drink so much tea, and it's giving me this output. Now, when I go to the respond to chat node, I can take that message from OpenAI and I can pop it in as the input to our respond to chat message. So this error is just because we need to tell our chat trigger that we're using a respond node so the two of them work together. You can see there's a little message here telling us to do that. So to fix that, I'm just going to go back to our chat trigger, add a property for respond mode and set that as using respond nodes. So now if I go to the chat window and drop in a message, this whole thing should work. So why do Brits drink so much tea? We can see it's messaged OpenAI and it's come back with a response in the chat. So one last concept that I want to cover is how to run your workflows. So you can see that I clicked this orange button at the bottom saying open chat. Normally this would say run workflow. So if you want to run the entire workflow, you would click this. If you just want to run a single node just to test that it's working, you can hover over a node and you can see there's a little play button. So if you click that, it's only going to run that singular node. It's not going to then run the nodes after it. So just a small thing, but I remember when I first started using N8N, I'd hit these play buttons and wonder why the whole thing wasn't running. It's because you've got to hit the orange button. Now, there you've built your first N8N workflow. We've added 3 nodes, a trigger, and a couple of actions. Next, we're going to be turning this into an AI agent workflow. But before we do that, I mentioned at the start that there were some workflow files that you can import. So I just want to quickly explain how those work. So think of these like checkpoints. At any point, you can click the 3 dots at the top here, click import from file, and if you go to the N8N Toolkit, you'll see that there's a folder called workflow files, and it's got a checkpoint for the N8N workflow at the end of that lesson. So if, for example, you want to just import what I've just built, you can click the lesson 1 checkpoint, and it's going to import exactly what I've built. So this is handy if you get stuck or just want to see how I've configured something. So in that first lesson, we used a basic AI message node, which has a few limitations compared to using an AI agent that should become clear in a moment. So in this second lesson, we're going to change that message node to an AI agent, and I'll walk through step by step how to set up an AI agent in N8N. So first thing I'm going to do is just remove these nodes. We can click on this, hit backspace, and that will get rid of them. Then I'm going to hit the plus icon and type in AI agent and just add that node. Click out of this for now because we'll talk about prompting in a moment. And you can see here that we've got 3 things that we can add to our AI agent. We can change the chat model, we can add memory, and we can add tools. So I'll talk about each of these 3 things step by step. So first, let's talk about the chat model. So you can see here that we can choose from different language models that we want to connect our AI agent to. So we can determine, does it go to OpenAI, Anthropic, Google Gemini, for example. So in most cases, OpenAI is absolutely fine, but there are two kind of worth being aware of. Firstly, if you're using Google Suite in your business, you'll already have access to the pro version of Google Gemini, so you won't have to pay anything extra to use that. And a bit more advanced is OpenRouter. OpenRouter is a site where you can pay for some credits and it allows you to access all these different AI models without having to have a subscription to each of them. So good if you're using a lot of different models for different things. In this case though, we're just going to select OpenAI as our chat model and we can select which OpenAI model we want to use if relevant. So I'm just going to leave that on GPT-4 Mini and go out of that. So now let's talk about memory. So by default, this AI agent can't remember anything that we've sent to it previously. So just to demonstrate this, if I open up the chat window and ask our agent to continue the sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, it's likely going to be able to come back and say, there we go, 4, 5, 6. But if I then ask it to keep going, it's not going to remember the first thing that I asked it because there's no memory. There's no way to store the first conversation. So you can see it's come back to me saying, could you please clarify what you would like me to continue? So in order to fix this, we need to tell our AI agent or give it somewhere that it can store those previous interactions, and that's what memory does. So if I click this plus icon, we're going to add simple memory. This is really easy to set up and doesn't require us to enter any credentials. It's all kind of built into N8N. The only thing kind of worth paying attention to here is the context window length. You can see it's set to 5 here. This is essentially how many previous messages do we want it to remember. So in this case, it's remembering the last 5 messages that we sent the agent. So we can go out of that. So if we try that little test again, if we open up the chat and say continue this sequence, it will come back with 4, 5, 6. And now if we say continue, it should go to the memory and it's coming back saying 7, 8, 9, 10. So we can see that our memory is working. So next let's talk about tools. So if I click on the plus icon here, you can see we've got a huge range of tools that we can connect our agent to. And by connecting a tool, what this does is it allows the AI agent to decide, based on the chat message we've sent it, whether to go to this tool to get additional information. So just as a quick example here, if I connect the YouTube tool, I've gone ahead and pre-connected my credentials here. We could say go and get the last 25 videos and I'll give it my channel ID. So if I just pop that in there. So my agent now has the ability to go to my YouTube channel and get information from my last 25 videos. Now, if I ask the agent when was the Battle of Britain, it's not going to do that because it's not relevant. But if I ask it what was the last video I created about N8N, it's likely going to use that tool. So let's just save that and we can do a quick test. So if we open up the chat and we say, what was the last video I made on N8N? It should go to my YouTube channel and we can see it's gone and got those last 25 videos. And it's come back with the answer. The last video you made on N8N is what is retrieval augmented generation, published on October 15th. So you can see that's an example of the agent using a tool to enhance the response that it's coming back with. Now, if you're building along, feel free to have a bit of a play here and try connecting it to a tool that makes sense to you. Otherwise, the tools that I would recommend connecting this to, let's just get rid of YouTube, are the Wikipedia tool. You don't need to connect anything for this. It's now got the ability to go to Wikipedia. And the other one we can add is the calculator, which just makes it a little bit better at performing arithmetic. So there we've given our agent a few extra powers, access to those tools that will give us better response when we ask questions of it. So next, I'm going to touch on prompting agents. So if we double click into our AI agent, you can see that the prompt that this agent is sending to the chat model is just the message that we send through our chat trigger node. Now, you can click here and change this to define below, which is going to give you just a little bit more control over that prompt. So we could just drag the chat input over from here. And this is now essentially the same thing. It's just taking that chat message and then sending it through as our prompt. But the reason why this is kind of helpful is because often when using AI agents in N8N, you'll want to combine multiple inputs from different nodes to build up your prompt. So being able to define it here means you can drag multiple different things and build it up. You can also hard code text here. So we could say, here's my question, give me 3 alternative answers based on my prompt. So just allows you to build up a slightly better prompt. Now, the other thing worth noting here around prompting is if you click on options, you can see that we can set a system message. This is going to be sent along with every prompt to the chat model. So this is a really good place to define the role or the behavior that you want from the chat model. So we might say you are a YouTube strategist with a goal of helping me write better scripts. So now this agent is going to give a little bit more context to the chat model, which means we're going to get slightly better responses. So now if we open up the chat and say, I'm thinking of writing a video about N8N and Airtable, give me a script idea. We should be able to see if we click on the logs here that the input going to the chat model is you're a YouTube strategist with a goal. So it's sent the system message and then it's sent the prompt, and it's combined both the chat message and that text that I added in the prompt window. And the response that it's come back with has reflected the fact that it's been given all that information. So before we do actually go ahead and connect this to an Airtable, one thing worth knowing about AI agents is that you can daisy chain them together in N8N. So we could add another AI agent in here, and we could make this first AI agent responsible for improving our prompt and the second agent responsible for running the prompt, which is something that we're going to do in lesson 4. So just worth knowing that you don't need to have one agent, you can have multiple agents all working together in N8N. But first we're going to connect this to an Airtable, which is going to be our personal research database, so we can save all of our research in one place. So in this lesson, we're going to add 2 nodes to our workflow, a date node and an add row to Airtable node. Now, if you'd rather use Google Sheets, that's absolutely fine. It doesn't make any difference. The reason why I'm not using Google Sheets here is because connecting Google products to N8N requires a few extra steps to connect your credentials. I am going to show how to do that in lesson 5. But at this point, I just want to keep it nice and simple. And also Airtable looks visually a little bit better to my eye. So you're going to end up with something like this. And this is our personal research database. This becomes a bit of a godsend later, particularly when we connect voice notes to our AI assistant. Because if you're sending your AI assistant multiple voice notes to do research, it's helpful to have a place to keep track of all that. So first off, you'll need to go to Airtable and create a free account if you don't already have one. You'll then get to a page like this, and I've created a template for both Airtable and Google Sheets that's in the N8N Toolkit in the description below that you can just import. So you don't have to worry about setting up columns or formulas or anything like that. So you can go down here to import and select your workspace, click continue, and we're going to import a CSV. Then from the N8N Toolkit, if you just select the Airtable template, it should be a CSV file, then click open, upload that file. That should then take you to this page where you can see it's picked up all the fields. You can click import and you should then be ready to go. So we're now going to go back to N8N and connect our Airtable. So if I go here, after respond to chat, I'm going to click the plus icon and we're going to add an Airtable node. So if I click on Airtable, what we want to do is create a record. A record in Airtable is just a row, basically. So we'll click that, and you'll see the first thing we need to do is connect our credential. So if we click here, we need to create a new credential. So we're going to connect to Airtable using an access token, but I want to first explain how to make sense of this page, because anytime you try and connect a tool to N8N, you're going to have to enter some credentials to create a connection between that tool and N8N. Now, luckily, you only have to do this once per tool, but it's helpful to know how to work this out. So luckily, N8N has really good docs on how to set up the credentials for virtually every tool you could integrate with. Now, if you're using the cloud version of N8N, this is incredibly easy. On the credential page, you'll see there's a little button here saying Ask Assistant, and you can click this, and it basically then just gives you step-by-step instructions on how to set up the credentials. So you can see here for Airtable, it's telling us exactly which page to go to, how to get our token, and where to enter it. Now, if you're on the self-hosted version like we are today, you just have to go through an extra step. You can click Open Docs, which will take you to a page that explains it anyway, but you can also then just click the Chat with Docs button at the top and ask it how to set up that connection. So let's go through an example of this. If we go back to our instance, click Open Docs, and we're going to follow the instructions to get a personal access token. So we need to click on this page and create a new token. So I'm just going to give this a name, N8N tutorial. We then need to add some scopes, and in the article, I believe it says we need the read, write for data records and schema base records read. So this one, and so we'll go ahead and add those. Then we're going to give it access to the specific base, which is just the spreadsheet that we're using. So in this case, it's the Airtable template.csv. So if I create that token, we can then copy that, and then we're going to paste that into where it says access token in N8N. And if we click save, that should all be working. So now we've connected to Airtable. So if we double click here, it's going to pull in our spreadsheet or our base, and we can get the specific table, and it will be able to return things like the column names. Here we go, imported table. So next thing we need to do is map our fields. Now here you can see it says waiting for input because we've not ran the workflow since we've added this node. So we need to run our workflow to get some data that we can pull in. So let's open our chat and we'll just send a dummy question. How many nodes does N8N have? We're just doing this just to run our workflow so we get some data. So now if we click into our Airtable node, it's showing waiting for input on the respond chat because that node is still waiting for us to respond, but we can select over here the nodes that came before it and we can see that there's data in there. Now you can see up here, you can look at your data in a few different ways. You can either have it in a table, JSON if that's helpful for you, or I often find the schema is most useful just from a kind of drag and drop perspective. I can open everything and see all the inputs that I have to work with. So in this case, for example, we can take the output from the AI agent. This is the response, and we're going to drag that over down to the response. The chat input is the question. So this is currently our research prompt. So we can drag that over here. Now we could drag the date over from the variables and context, but you can see it's not formatted particularly nice. We've got this like date time thing going on here, which just visually isn't going to look particularly great. So to fix that, we're going to add a date and time node. So I'm going to add it just after our AI agent here. And this is going to be our first data transformation node. So we'll click here, manipulate date and time values. And we've got two options here. We could either do get current date or format a date. I'm going to do format a date because what I'm going to do is take the date from the chat message, and then we're going to tidy that date up. So we use the format a date node. And as I say, what I will do is click into variables and context, and we're going to take this input, which is a kind of an ugly version of the date time. We'll drag that in as our date. And because I'm British, I'm going to change that to custom format and make that day, month, year. And that should, now if I run that, output a date. Oh, that needs to be lowercase y's. There we go. So now we've got a nice tidy date that we can pass over to Airtable. Now, before we map that date field, I'm just going to tidy one thing up because we don't technically need to wait for the respond to chat to create our row in Airtable. So I'm actually going to delete this arrow here, and we're going to branch this off like this. So that we can have both of these things happen in parallel. We don't need to rely on the respond to chat node working in order for the Airtable node to work. This is just a good best practice to make your workflows a bit more resilient because it means that if you had an error in the respond to chat node, it's not going to prevent it from adding a record in Airtable. So let's save that and go into our Airtable record. We're just going to pull that date value over. So you can see we've got a nice formatted date now that we can just pull over here. And we're going to leave these two other values blank for now. We're going to fill those out in a later lesson. But now if I click execute step, we can see that that's gone ahead and added a new row in our Airtable. So if I click here, we can see that that's just appeared now. So there we've connected our first external tool to N8N. We talked about credentials. We've mapped data from multiple different nodes into our spreadsheet. Next, we're going to build a prompt improvement agent. Now, the response you get from AI is only as good as the prompt you give it. So next, we're getting a bit meta and prompting an AI model to improve our prompt. So it's going to take our chat message, improve it, then rate it out of 10. We'll then pass that rating to an if node. And if it's above a 7 out of 10, it's going to pass that prompt to a research agent. But if it's below 7, it's going to ask us some additional questions and do another iteration. So first we're going to add an LLM chain before our AI agent. This just sends a message to an AI model and comes back with a response. Very similar to an AI agent, but we can't connect tools to it. It's a little bit simpler. The reason why I'm choosing to use an LLM chain here over an AI agent is because we need the output of this to be in a consistently structured format. And the way that we do that is by turning this option on here, require specific output format, and connecting something called an output parser, which I'll do in just a second. Now, technically, you can add one of these to an AI agent, but in my personal experience, AI agents tend to listen to the output parser a little bit less reliably, whereas LLM chains tend to use it very consistently. So just to ensure that we get consistent, reliable results, we're using an LLM chain here, and we're going to connect an output parser. So as with any AI node, we need to first connect our model. So for simplicity, I'm just going to add the OpenAI chat model. We can see it's already connected to our credentials. GPT 4.1 mini is fine for the time being. We'll come back to the output parser in a moment, but first we're going to set up our prompt in our LLM chain. So I'll double click here. And as before, we're going to change the source of our prompt from the chat trigger node to one that we're going to define here. Now I'm going to enter a meta prompt that I've been using for a couple of years to improve my prompts. This basically takes your starting prompt, critiques it, rates it out of 10, comes up with some questions that will improve it, and then suggests a better alternative. So it's a very good kind of starting prompt. So I've added that all in here. You can get this in the N8N Toolkit below in the lesson 4 workbook, but I'm just going to drag our chat input here. So it's got our kind of original prompt to work with. And now if I run this, we should see it's going to come back with something. Perfect. So you can see that that's come back with something there. It's rated my prompt as a 3 out of 10, and it's come back with a couple of questions for how I could improve that. So that's absolutely fine. But the problem with this is that we've got quite a lot of different things going on in this output. We've got a rating, we've got questions, we've got the revised prompt, we've got the original prompt. And what I want to do is kind of split these into separate things so that in future nodes, I could drag in just the rating or just the suggested questions. So that's going to make it a little bit easier to work with that data. So this is where our output parser comes in. So I'm going to click out of here and we're going to add a structured output parser. Now how this works is we give it an example of how we want the output to be structured, and the AI responses are going to try as best as it can to follow that structure. Now this uses something called JSON. The only thing you need to know about JSON at this point is that each of these lines gets split into its own piece of data that we can then map and work with individually. So in this example, you could map just state or just city. So I'm gonna just remove that and add in my own example where I want the AI response to split out 3 things. I want the revised prompt as a single field. I want the prompt score to be just a number, and I want the suggestions for how to improve the prompt. So now, if we rerun this LLM chain, we should hopefully see that it's going to output it a little bit differently. Here we go. So you can see now, if we go into the JSON or the schema, we can see that now the output is structured into 3 separate fields, which is going to make our life a lot easier when trying to map this data in future nodes. So the next thing we need to do is work out if our prompt score is above or below 7, because remember we said if it's above 7, we're going to send it to our research agent. If it's below, we want to iterate and improve the prompt. Now you can see here based on this little T that this is currently a text string. So although it looks like a number, it would be treated as a piece of text. If I were to go and add an if node here, and if we said if the prompt score is greater than or equal to 7, this is probably not going to work how we would expect, because you can see here it's the wrong type. 6 is a string and it was expecting a number. Now there's a few ways you could fix this. We could tidy this up in our structured output parser, but this is a good time to introduce the set node. This is one of the most important nodes in N8N because it allows us to set new bits of data or overwrite data that might already exist. So I'm going to click here and add a set edit fields node. So what this allows us to do is drag in a bit of data or multiple bits of data, and then we can give it a new name. So I'm going to call this the prompt score, and we can then set what type of data this is. So I'm going to change it from a string to a number. Now when we output this, it looks exactly the same, but what we've got here is a number. So now if we go into our if node and we change this from the prompt score that our LLM chain gave us to the prompt score from the set node, now we can see that the output of this is false. 6 is not greater than or equal to 7. So now if our prompt is rated above 7 out of 10, it should correctly route it and send it over to our research agent. But next we need to set up what happens if it's below a 7 out of 10, and we want it to tell us, send us some questions that we can answer, and then go through this loop again. So first of all, I'm going to just rename our set node, just otherwise it's going to get a bit messy. So I'm just going to say turn prompt score to an integer, and we're going to add a respond to chat node after our if node. So let's type in respond to chat. And what I'm going to do is just paste in a message template. And I'm just going to update this. So basically what I'm doing here is just outputting all the information, including the prompt score. So I'm just going to remove that and drag in our prompt score. So it's saying it's a 6 out of 10. To improve it, could you answer as much of the following as possible? So from our LLM chain output, we should have these suggestions. So we can drag that in there. And then I want to see the current prompt that we're working with. So this is the revised prompt. So now if we test this with our chat trigger, I'm actually going to go into the if node and just change this to 10 or above, just so it forces it to go through the false route, because it's very unlikely going to be a 10 out of 10. Now, if we open up chat and I'm going to ask it, what is the best dog to buy as a pet? Please rank all breeds and give me a table of the top 10 to consider. So now it should run our workflow. There we go. So we can see based on the green lines that it's gone through the false path, and we've got a message back saying the prompt is a 6 out of 10. To improve it, could you answer as much of the following as possible? So that all looks good. I'm going to connect this node to our LLM chain. So the response that I write back is going to get sent back in to do another revision. We are going to need to update the LLM chain prompt to take in this input as well as our chat trigger input. So we'll do that in a second. But first, let's see what happens if I give this a response. So I'm just going to say it needs to be compatible with children. I don't want one with lots of health issues or molting. So this has sent it back, but as you can see, nothing's happened because in our LLM chain prompt, it's not really listening to this node. Now we could go down here and enter something like response and add in the chat input from our response node like this. Now, this would work the first time we go around that loop, but it's going to cause us a few issues later because this node or this prompt is expecting to have values for both of these inputs. And if it only has one, which would be the case if we now try to start this workflow from scratch, it's only going to have the chat trigger and not the response chat input. It's going to cause a couple of issues. So to fix this, we need to use the set node again. So I'll show you what I mean and then how to fix it. So if we go back to the chat window, and if I say, I want one that is calm, what I'm expecting will happen is the LLM will have forgotten some previous context. So if we look at what it's come back with, it's rating our prompt now a 5 out of 10, and it's asking about whether we want compatibility with children. So I've already told it that, but it's just forgotten it from previous messages. So we need to fix that by adding some set nodes so that we can pass the conversation history throughout this loop so it doesn't get lost every time we go around. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a set node after our chat trigger so that we can set the original message and make sure that that never gets lost. So we'll add in a set node, and to do that, we're going to need to just run our workflow again. So let me just do that. And then let's pull in our chat input, and we're going to call this original prompt. So now we're going to add a set node here. And we're going to set a few bits of data in this node. We'll set the response that we send back through the chat. We'll set the latest version of the prompt, which is essentially our kind of conversation history because it should kind of get better over time. And we're going to set the original prompt. And the reason we're doing that is that it's basically going to overwrite it and ensure that when we go back around through this loop, we're not going to forget that original message. So in order to do this, we need to have some data to work with. So I am just going to send in just some test messages just to run this and get some data coming out of this node. So I should now be able to drag a few bits of data. So let's first get our original trigger chat message, and we'll overwrite that as the original prompt. We'll then take our latest version of the prompt, so we'll call this revised prompt, so the revised prompt here. And then we're going to set our conversation history. So this is going to be the output of our respond to chat node. So now we should have all the building blocks that we need to not forget any context as we go through that loop. So first I'm going to just rename this just to keep it tidy, and we're going to go out of there. Also going to rename this first node to set original prompt, just so that when we're mapping data in the LLM chain, it's a little bit clearer kind of which nodes we're working with. So we'll hit save, and I'm just going to send a test message here just so we get a bit of data coming out of here, because the next thing we need to do is update the prompt in our LLM chain. So let's just get data. So now if we go into our LLM chain, we are now going to update our prompt to use these new bits of data that we've set. So I'm going to remove this bit, and we're going to enter our original prompt, which will pull in from our set original prompt node. We're then going to pull in our revised prompt. So if we've already gone through the loop, it's going to take the latest version of the prompt. So we'll drag that in from the append response node. And then we're going to drag in our conversation history. So this will be the latest message with our responses to any questions. So now when we run this, we should get a much better response that improves over time, and we shouldn't go backwards or forget any context. So let's go back here, and I'm going to ask in the chat, what is the best email marketing software? So it's come back with a 5 out of 10, and it's asked me for a few questions. So size of my list. So let's say I've got 2,000 contacts, budget is $200 a month. Cloud-based preference, and I need automation. That should now take us through our second loop, and hopefully the prompt is now getting better. So it's now a 7 out of 10. It's still asking for a few things to improve. I'm just going to go back, and I remember we changed this to a 10, so I'm going to put this back down to 7, so that hopefully now next time it takes us through to the true path. So it's asking me to clarify if I have any required integration. So let's say I need it to integrate with Shopify and have good deliverability. So this should take us through our second iteration of the loop. So we can see down here, it's rated our prompt a 7 out of 10. So it's gone through the true path of our if node and been sent on to our research agent. Now, it's worth saying there are more elegant ways of doing what we've just done, but most of them would require using a code node, and I'm trying for as long as possible to avoid using any code in this tutorial. You might also be wondering why we haven't used a loop node. So N8N has a very handy node called loop over items, but generally this is better used for situations where you have multiple inputs that you want to split into a batch. So let's say you had 5 videos coming in and you wanted to get the title of each one. You can have an input of 5 videos and then run through kind of 5 iterations and then output that as a single list. In our case, we only have one thing coming in and one thing going out. So although it looks like a loop, in N8N terms, it's not really how a loop node should be used. Now, 2 last things I want to touch on before we go on to lesson 5. Firstly, we need to quickly update our research agent to take our output and use the latest version of the prompt. So we're just going to drag the revised prompt from our basic LLM chain. This is going to be the latest version, and drop that in here. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on our LLM chain node and the set node and just hit P on the keyboard to pin this data. I'll explain why we're doing this in lesson 5. Now, if you're still with me, that was the hardest of the 10 lessons. So if you're still following, you are doing great. And if you have any questions or run into any issues, just drop them in the comments below and I'll respond to everyone. So next we're going to connect to Google Docs and create a new Google Doc for every bit of research that our AI assistant does. First though, this is a good point to tidy up your workflow with some sticky notes. So you can add a sticky note by right-clicking and selecting Add Sticky Note, or you can just hit Shift-S. And sticky notes are helpful for annotating your workflows, especially if you're sharing them with multiple people. You can double click into them and add some text in Markdown. So I'm just going to call this trigger. I find it helpful to use sticky notes to kind of break up the different sections of the workflow visually. So we can change the color, call this prompt improver. And if you want to make your sticky notes look 20% more edgy, you can always go to settings, to personal, and flip on dark mode. So if we change that to the dark theme, save, and then let's go back. So let's add one more for our research agent. We'll just pop that in there, change that, and I'll just select all of that, drag that here so it's taking up a little bit less space. We'll name that research agent, and we are ready to connect Google Docs. So we're going to click here and add a Google Docs node. And by the way, how we go about connecting Google Docs is exactly the same as how you would go about connecting Google Sheets, YouTube, Google Drive. So it's handy to know how to do this. So we're going to select a create a document node. And of course, the first thing we need to do is add our credentials. So we'll click create new credential. And you can see that we need two things. We need a client ID and a client secret. So to get these, we're going to go over to Google Cloud Console and we need to create a new project. So I'm just going to call this N8N Intelligence. We'll wait for it to create that project. So that's created a project. I'll put links to this and all the instructions in the N8N Toolkit in the description. The next thing we need to do is go to APIs and services, and we need to enable Google Docs. So if we click enable APIs and services, we're going to type in Google Docs API. This will give it the ability to read and write access to our Google Docs files. So we'll enable that. So that's done. We now need to go to the OAuth consent screen, and we need to just go through the settings here. So we'll call this again N8N Intelligence. We'll pop in your email address. We'll go through all of this. It's going to be for internal use. We'll go through continue, create. And then next we're going to go over to branding, and we need to add a authorized domain. Now, if you're using N8N Cloud, you'll just enter n8n.cloud here. But if you're using self-hosted, you'll need to enter your self-hosted N8N domain. So in my case, it's going to be hstgr hosting.cloud. So we then hit save. So from here, we now need to go back to APIs and services and select credentials. And we're going to create a new credential for an OAuth client ID. This is going to be a web application. We can give it a name if you like, N8N Intelligence. And we need to enter an authorized redirect URI. Now, N8N gives you that here. So you just need to copy this link and pop it in here like that. Click create, and you'll then be able to see your client ID, which is up here, and the client secret, which you can copy by clicking here. So I'm going to pop those into N8N like this. So we've got our client ID, copy our client secret, drop that in there. And the final step is we just need to click sign in with Google, click through, give it these permissions, and we see the connection was successful. So we can go out of that, and we now have access to Google Docs. So we've got a little error here where it's not able to fetch documents from Google Drive. So I forgot, when we enabled the APIs and services, we also need to give it access to Google Drive as well as Google Docs. So if we go back into enable APIs and services, we need to give it access also to the Google Drive API. So just exactly the same as we did before, we just go in, hit enable. We can now see when we go back into N8N, we're able to get information from our Google Drive. So you can select a folder that makes sense to you where you want these documents to be added to. So I've just set mine here. And at this point, it's worth just running a test just to make sure that this node is working properly. So I'm just going to give this Google Doc a name. We're going to drag in the revised prompt. It's going to be probably a little bit too long, but we'll use that for now just so that we have a unique title. Now you can see that when this node runs, all it's doing is creating a Google Doc with a title. It's not got any ability to add any content. So we need to add a second node to go to Google Docs to update a document. And what we're going to do is we need to drop in the doc ID, which is this one here. And then we can add an action to insert some text into the body. So where we've got a field here for text, we're going to drag in some of the information from our LLM chain. So let's drag in our revised prompt, and I'm going to add a separate action to drag in the output of our research agent. Now, if you want, you can tidy this up. You could add headers and add a bit of formatting, but for the time being, I just want to add a bit of data in here so we can get this up and running. So let's run a quick test. If we go out here, open the chat, and if I ask it, What golf clubs do I need to buy to finally break 90? We'll let that do its thing. It's probably going to come back with a few questions. Weather, British. Handicap, very high. Skill level, not great. And let's say a complete set minus driver. So hopefully that gives it enough information to create a fairly decent prompt that goes to our research agent. So that's now doing some research. And what I'm hoping is that it should create a Google Doc and add that content. So it looks like that's all run except for our update node. So let's have a look what's gone wrong. Okay, so that didn't work because I dragged the output into this action field. So this needs to be set to insert body, and then the output goes in this text field. So now if we run that again, hopefully this time that should now work. So it's doing its thing, going to the agent to actually do the research. Then it's creating a document, updating the document. Perfect. Okay, that looks good. If I go into my Google Docs now, we'll just double check. So here we can see it's created a Google Doc where we've got the prompt that was sent to the research agent and then the research coming out of the agent. Now, as I say, ideally you could tidy this up, add some headings and nice formatting. But for now, that is good for me. So next thing that I think would be good to do is to add a link to each of these Google Docs into our Airtable. So if we come in here, I'm just going to add another sticky note just around our research database. So let's just give this a name. And so while we could leave our workflow like this will work absolutely fine. This is a good instance where it makes sense to branch our workflow and do the date formatting and the Google Docs creation as kind of two separate things in parallel, and then merge that data back together. So I'm just going to add another arrow like this so we get kind of two separate things going on here. And we're going to delete this line connecting the Google Doc to the date node. And what I'm going to do is just add in a merge node after our Google Docs creation, and we're going to connect the date to that merge. And what a merge node does is it takes multiple inputs and waits for all of those inputs to be ready before then sending a single output. So I am going to actually put that after the Airtable because I think what would be useful is when we get a response back saying this whole thing is complete, I think having a link to the Airtable makes sense. So that looks good to me. All we now need to do is go into our Airtable node and we're going to add a link to our Google Docs file. So it looks like we don't have a URL input. So I'm going to kind of build this manually by taking the URL structure. So if we put that in like that, that should build a URL that would take us to that Google Doc. Now we're halfway there and we'll soon get this connected to WhatsApp and Lovable so you can turn voice note ideas into app MVPs. But we've covered a lot of ground already. We've used 17 different nodes and I'm sure you probably have some questions. If so, I'd encourage you to drop them in the comments below because chances are if you're wondering something at this point, other people probably are too, so please ask away. Now in level 6, we're going to be replacing our chat nodes with WhatsApp nodes so that you can use this out and about from your phone. Now if you'd rather use Telegram or Slack, it's going to be a very similar process, but I'll walk through how to do this in WhatsApp in this tutorial. So first thing we're going to do is change our chat trigger node to a WhatsApp trigger node. So we're going to remove that and we're going to click add node and type in WhatsApp, and we're going to go for the WhatsApp Business Cloud. And we want to use this on messages trigger. So I'll click that and we'll just connect that to our set node. And if we click into here, you can see we need to set up our credentials. So we'll click create new credential and you can see we need two things. We need a client ID and client secret. So to get these, you will need to create a Meta developer account. It only takes a few seconds. I'll drop a link in the toolkit on how to do that. But that will take you to a page like this. So you'll need to create a new app. So I'm going to click that and we're going to call this N8N Intelligence V4. We'll go through this. Now this step is very important. You need to select all and scroll right down to the bottom and select other. If you don't do this, then there's no way of kind of getting back and you'll have to create a new app. So make sure you select other, then click next. It's going to be a business app and we need to select a business portfolio. So I'm just going to add it to mine, create an app, and pop in your password. So our app's been created. We now need to add the WhatsApp product. So I'm going to click Setup on the WhatsApp product here. And from this page, in order to get our client ID and secret, we need to click App Settings, click on Basic, and we should be able to get them at the top here. So I'm just going to copy that over to N8N as our client ID, and then the secret will then copy and paste that in here. Hit save, and that should be connected. So next we need to change our respond to chat nodes to WhatsApp nodes. So I think we've got two. We've got this one and the one right at the end. So this one I'm going to delete here, and we're going to go back to WhatsApp Business Cloud, and we're going to add a send message and wait for response node. So we'll add that in. Now, for whatever reason, the credential used for a WhatsApp trigger is different to the one used for a WhatsApp action. It's a little bit annoying, but it means we have to set up a new credential here. And we need slightly different information for this. We need an access token and a business account ID. Now, if you go back to the app we just created in Meta, you can get this information by going to API setup, and it's on this page. You can get an access token here, and the business account ID is this one. I'm going to copy the business account ID, but I'm not going to use that access token. And the reason why is that this access token is a temporary token. It lasts for about an hour or two. So it's a little bit annoying if you use this, because while you're testing, it will keep getting disconnected and you'll have to keep reactivating it. So in order to get a permanent token, you'll need to create a system user to get a system token. Now you can do that from this page. I'll link to this in the workbook in the N8N Toolkit for this lesson. So you can just click here on add user. You'll need to give it a name. I'm not sure this is going to let me do this because I think it only lets you have one admin. Yeah, so it's only letting me have the single admin, but you'll go through those steps and you'll need to assign the app that you've just built as an asset and give full control to that system user. So it'll be something like that. And you can then click Generate Token, select the app, set the expiry to either 60-day expiry or never, and then we're going to give it a few permissions. So we need to scroll to the bottom, and we're going to give it WhatsApp Business Messaging, WhatsApp Management, and the WhatsApp Business Manage Events option will then generate a token, and we should then be able to copy and paste this token into N8N, and that should give us now permanent access to use that. So that's WhatsApp all connected. We now just need to go and change that other response chat node and do a bit of data mapping. So if we go out of here and let's find our response chat node, we'll get rid of that. And we'll change that to this one just needs to be a WhatsApp send message action because we don't need to wait for a response. This is basically saying this whole workflow has completed, here's a link. So we'll change it to that. We don't need to set up credentials this time because it's already done, but we do now need to go through and set up some of these fields. So the first thing we need to do is set the sender phone number. Now Facebook give you a phone number that you can use for testing. You could also use something like Twilio or burner.com if you want to use this more permanently. And you then need to add the recipient's phone number. This is just going to be your phone number. And we'll need to enter the text body, which we'll go through in a moment. But let's just go back and do the same thing for our other WhatsApp nodes. So we'll set the sender phone number, set the recipient number, and again, we'll do the message in a moment. And the WhatsApp trigger, I don't think we need to set anything up just yet. So that's all looking good. So let's just hit save and run our workflow. So I now need to trigger this from WhatsApp. So I'm just going to send a message to this WhatsApp number, which should now trigger the workflow. So we can see that's triggered it. I've just sent it a message saying test. So we've got an error on our simple memory node that's attached to our research agent. The reason this is happening is because it no longer has this session ID. This is from our chat trigger node. Because we've changed that to WhatsApp now, that no longer exists. So we're going to change this session ID from chat trigger node to define below. And this just needs to be something unique. It honestly doesn't matter too much. So in this case, I'm going to use the timestamp of the message because that's going to be unique every time. So now if we save that, run the whole thing again, I'll just send it a test message. Hopefully we get a little bit further this time. So I've sent it another message now, it's running. The number that I'm messaging, by the way, is the number that we've set here. It's the sender phone number. So that's got a little bit further. So that's fixed the memory issue and it's now gone through pretty much the whole thing. We've just got an error in Airtable. Again, that's because the chat trigger message no longer exists. So we basically need to go through our whole workflow, everywhere where we've referenced the chat trigger input, we need to change it to WhatsApp. So we'll go through and we'll just drag these, update that here. That should work fine. So I know that in our LLM chain, we are referencing this. So I'm going to update this to now use WhatsApp. Those should be okay to say the same. This one we are going to need to update as well. And then I think everything else is just referencing our AI agent or our LLM chain. So I think that's everything updated that needs to be updated. So let's save, run another test and see if we get any further. Here we go. Created the Google Doc. Perfect, so that's created the Airtable. And apparently it sent me a message back. So not sure if you can see that very well, but that sent me a message back. So we should now be able to go into our WhatsApp message nodes and add a message that pulls in data. So I'm just going to pop in this template, go to expressions, and I'm just going to drag in some of the inputs. So this one is from our LLM chain and we're pulling in the prompt rating out of 10. We're then going to add the suggestions. This is exactly the same as what we did with the response chat node, but we're just having to update it. And then we need to get the revised prompt. So that should all work fine. And then in this node, I'm just going to add a link to the Google Doc. So for now, we'll just say, here's a link to your research. And then we'll pop in the URL that I built that links to the Google Doc. So if we just run one more test of this whole thing, let's go out of here, hit save, and I'll just click execute. And so I'm just going to trigger this by saying, what is the best place to travel to in November from the UK? So let's run that. It's doing its thing. So it's come back with a big long message. It's asking me if I want to go to a beach and if there are any health restrictions and whether it's for solo travel or family trip. So let me say family travel and beach, please. So if I send that back, we can see that's now gone through and triggered this again. We've got some issue here. So, okay, so this is still referencing our original trigger node. So we need to fix that, change that to our WhatsApp trigger. Here we go. And the conversation history needs to be from the send message and wait for response node. So we need to drop that in there. So let's go again, execute workflow, send that message. It's going to trigger it. Then getting the message back. So I'm going to go and say family and beach, please. Submit. So hopefully that goes through the loop properly this time. Perfect, cool. So that's gone through to the research agent. That's doing the actual research on where to go. Now it's gone through here. Is it going to create a record? Is it going to work? Come on, Airtable. Yeah, it's done it. Okay, so it says, here's a link to your research. So if I click that now, I'm not signed into Google Docs on this phone. Hold on. If we go here, we can see it's created that document. Now, in theory, we could just output this directly into the WhatsApp message, but WhatsApp has a maximum number of characters. So it's better to kind of link to a document that contains all that information. So all that's left to do is to anthropomorphize your WhatsApp app. I'm gonna name mine after this guy because I find it funny getting WhatsApp messages from him. So we'll upload an app icon here. I'm just gonna select this one of Gandalf. We'll then change that to Gandalf the Grey, hit save. We're all done. Now for lesson 7, we're going to take a step back and do a quick fire round of 7 little quality of life features or productivity hacks in N8N that will save you time and headaches. So number 1, N8N does not have an autosave. This is incredibly frustrating, especially if you've been working on a workflow for hours and then you lose all of your progress. So luckily there's an easy fix. If you're using Chrome, you can install a Chrome extension that will autosave your progress. So N8N Master is one that I use, and you can just set it to autosave every 5 minutes or so. This one also works with the self-hosted version of N8N, which is handy. So number 2 is pinning data. And I didn't actually use this in lesson 5 where I thought I would. But if you select a node and hit P, you can see we get this little pin icon. You can also go into the node and select this icon. Now, what this does is it basically freezes the output of that node. So you don't have to rerun it to get data out of it. You'll have noticed in this tutorial so far, in order to get data to set up future nodes, I have to keep running the workflow to get data coming out of things. So with pinning data, you don't need to do that. You can just pin it once and then use that data forever. So this is particularly handy when working with AI nodes, because it means then you don't have to keep running your AI nodes and using up AI credits in order to just test and create your workflows. So the next thing is deactivating nodes. So I only learned about this recently, but if you select a node and hit D on the keyboard, it deactivates that node, meaning that the workflow kind of just passes straight through it. So next thing is renaming nodes. So I've done this a few times in this tutorial so far. A simple way of doing it is to just select a node and hit spacebar. So you can then call this, for example, Research AI Agent, and that's just going to help keep your workflows nice and tidy. Number 5 is using the little brush icon down here. This tidies up your workflow. It doesn't work well if you've used sticky notes because it's going to move the nodes out of the sticky notes. So you can see like this. This has made our workflow look a bit tidier, but we would then have to move the sticky notes accordingly. But it can be handy, particularly if you've got a messy, complex workflow going on. Number 6, importing JSON. So I mentioned at the beginning that in the N8N Toolkit, we've got JSON files for each of the lessons that you can import. So you click on these 3 little dots and you can click import from file. What I didn't mention is that there's a really easy way to create those files. So if you go to OpenAI or Claude, you can just ask it to generate a N8N JSON file and then describe the workflow you're trying to build. If I then click that, it's going to build a file that I can download and import directly into N8N. So here you can see it's building the JSON file. And again, you don't need to know anything about JSON. All you need to know is that you can download this file, import it, and it's going to give you a pretty good starting point. I sometimes find this quite helpful when I'm building quite a complex workflow, just to get a few different ideas of how I could approach it. So if we download that JSON file, go back to N8N, I'm just going to scroll down here, go to import from file. I'm going to select that, and here you go. So nice and simple, but you can see it's done exactly what we've asked. Now, sometimes when you do this, you get some weird node choices, but it's good for just getting a bit of inspiration. Particularly good as well when you're just starting out with N8N to kind of get a bit of a feel for how to approach your workflows. So the final quickfire tip is to use subflows and error workflows. Now, in this tutorial, we're building this big monolithic workflow because it's kind of easier to see everything in context together. But if I were building this in production, I would probably break this down into a few smaller workflows and use the execute subflow node to trigger the relevant parts. You can see if we add a node, type in execute subflow, we can use this to call different workflows in our account. So it just helps to keep things clean and make your workflows a bit more resilient. The other related thing here is using error workflows. So if you go to settings in this workflow, you can decide what happens if there's an error in this workflow. So currently we're not doing anything, but the general best practice is to create one error workflow in your N8N account that all of your workflows that you create reference that single error workflow. Now in your error workflow, I'll quickly show you how to do this. We're going to trigger it from an error. So we've got this N8N error trigger, and you're going to do 2 things. Firstly, you're going to send yourself some kind of notification. This is up to you. It could be email, it could be a Slack notification, it could be Telegram, WhatsApp, whatever you like. The other thing we're going to do is add a log of that error so that we can get a kind of a high level view of where we're getting errors, what workflows are unstable. Now in the N8N Toolkit, you'll see in the template that I created, there's also an error log template that you can use. I've set the columns up already to match what N8N use, so you can just select map automatically, and that's going to do all the mapping for you. You don't have to set anything else up. Now if we name this error workflow, save that. Now in all of our other workflows, we should now be able to go to settings and set that as our error workflow. Hit save and we're done. Obviously you need to set up the credentials for the notification that you want to send, but that's all that you need to do. Now, if you've come across any other handy little tips or time-saving features in N8N, please share them in the comments below. But we're going to move on to lesson 8 and build a speech-to-text converter so that we can send our WhatsApp AI assistant voice messages. Now, I don't know about you, but I find typing prompts to be a little bit slow and clunky, especially when trying to build something complex like a website or an app idea that I'm trying to build, which is what we're going to be building in lesson 10. So given that most of us can speak 3 to 4 times faster than we can type, it makes sense where possible to speak your prompts rather than type them. So that's what we're going to set up now. So in order to set up speech to text, I'm going to first take our WhatsApp trigger, the message that we send, and create two routes, one for text, which will basically be what we've currently got, and one for voice notes. So I'm going to just give ourselves a little bit more space, drag this out over here, and I'm going to add a switch node. Now, a switch node is similar to an if node, but it allows us to route data based on conditions that we set. So it doesn't have to be true or false like an if node. It can be based on any logic that we define. So in order to get some data for that, I'm going to need to just run our workflow. So I'll hit save and I'll send Gandalf a message. This time I'll do an audio one. Gandalf, what does N8N stand for? So if we go into our switch node now, we can see we've got a WhatsApp trigger. And we should have something that tells us that that was an audio file. So you can see here the message type is audio. So I'm going to drag this in over here and say if the message type is audio, we're going to send this through a route called voice note. We're going to add a second route, which is going to be if the message type is text, we're going to just call that route text. So now we've basically got two different routes. I'm going to delete that because that's going to be the text route. But what we want to now do is create a sort of a route for if it's a voice note. So I'm going to add a new sticky note and we're going to call this our voice note route. Let's make it a different color. Double click in here and we'll go voice note. So the first thing that we need to do if it's a voice note is we need to download the media. So I'm going to go to the WhatsApp Business Cloud and we're going to use this node action for download media. We need to drag in the media ID of that voice note file. So it's this one here. So the audio ID. We'll drag that in like that. If we execute that, we should see that it's given us this URL. The only downside is that that URL has authentication on it because it's from my WhatsApp account. You can't just go to that URL and access that audio. So we need to fix that by adding a HTTP request that's going to go and get that file and then make that publicly available. So I'm going to go out of here and add a HTTP request. Now, I'm not going to explain too much about this here. If you want to know more about using webhooks and HTTP requests in N8N, I've created a whole separate video that you can watch here. But for now, all we're going to do is drag this URL over here. And for authentication, we're going to use predefined credential type. Basically, what we're saying here is use the credentials that I've already set up for WhatsApp. We don't need to kind of go through and reset something new here. So we're going to scroll down and use the WhatsApp API credential type. And we're going to select this one. This is the WhatsApp API that we've set up earlier. So now if I execute this, that's come back with this data file and we could download that and listen to that audio. So this is now ready to pass over to an AI service. So you've got a few options here. We're using OpenAI today, so we'll stick with that, but you could use Google Gemini, Transcribe, or whatever you're using. So the action that you want is transcribe a recording. So this is expecting to take in an audio file and output some text. So we'll add that in like that. It's already connected to our credentials. So if we execute this step, we should now see that it's transcribed that text. So we've got our working speech to text route set up. So all that's left to do is to connect our transcribe a recording node, which now outputs text, to the set original prompt node. So now basically whether we send a text message or a voice note, it's going to be set in this node as the original prompt. So we need to go in here and we need to drag the output of this, so this text. We need to just sort of append it here. So it's going to output some text. So if we run that, we can see the original prompt has been set as hello, what is N8N? So we can save that and that should now be working. We've now got speech to text up and running. Now, if you're still with me, you're doing incredibly well. We're about to add two very cool features to our AI assistant. So in lesson 9, we're going to give our research AI agent the ability to perform RAG. So RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation, is just a fancy way of saying when working with an AI or an LLM, we want that LLM to go and fetch some stuff before it generates its response. Now, the reason why we might want it to go and fetch some stuff is that that stuff might make its response more accurate, more personalized, and more up to date. So how does this work? So first we put some files in something called a content store. This could be a closed content store like our Google Drive, or it could be an open content store like the internet. And we tell the LLM to reference that content store and the files in it before it generates its response. So here's an example. So without RAG, if you went to an LLM like ChatGPT and you said, how should I grow my business? You're going to get a pretty weak response. It's going to say something like strengthen your core offer, acquire more customers. Not very helpful. But if we add RAG and we connect our LLM to a content store, maybe give it access to our Google Drive, our CRM, our accounting software, or our ad networks, if we then ask the same question of the LLM, we're going to get something a bit more specific and personalized to us. It might say double down on this customer segment or increase the budget for this campaign by this amount. So stuff that is actually helpful and actionable. Now, let's go one level deeper. So we don't actually connect our tools to the LLM when using RAG. What we actually do is we take our files or our content and we first split this into chunks. So imagine you're taking a Google Doc and you split it into lots of little chunks. We then turn those chunks into numbers or vectors, and we stick those numbers in a database or a vector store. And that process is called embedding. So we're embedding our vectors into a vector store. So in N8N, this is how it looks. There are kind of two parts to building a RAG agent. First, we need to store our files or our embeddings in a vector store. And the second bit is we need to then retrieve that. So the storage part, a really simple example of this would be we download a file and we simply add it to a vector store. And I'm going to show you how to do this in just a moment. Don't worry about this for the moment. We'll touch on this when we actually build it. Then the second part, if you imagine this is our research agent that we built in lesson 2, all we then do is give it access to a tool that is our Supabase vector store, this one that we created over here. That agent is now going to reference that vector store before it generates its response. So if we go back to N8N, let's have a crack at building this. So I'm going to add a sticky note and we're going to make it purple because it's AI. And I'm going to call that RAG. Let's drag it over here, give ourselves a little bit of space. And so the first thing I'm going to do is store some documents in a vector store. Now, if you want to take this further, you could add any content that makes sense to you into your vector store. But just for simplicity, we're going to take these Google Docs that we created that contain our research, and we're going to add that into a content store that our research agent can reference. So over time, as you do more research, your research agent is going to have a larger pool of information that it can reference. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a Supabase vector store. So if you type in vector store, you can see here, and we're going to select the action add documents to a vector store. Now we'll set Supabase up in just a moment, but I just want to get this all kind of connected first. So we're going to drag from update document and then pop that in here. Now I mentioned earlier about embedding chunks into the vector store. So we need to add an embedding model. So for simplicity, we're just going to use the OpenAI one. This is absolutely fine. You don't need to change this. The text embedding model is fine. There's nothing really we need to do there for the time being. And we also need to add a document loader. So in N8N, we can just use the default one. There's not really anything we need to change here either. So that's all ready to go. All we now need to do is set up our vector store in Supabase. So to do that, you'll need to create a free Supabase account. And then if we create a new project, let me call this N8N RAG, add a password, and we'll create a new project. Then what we need to do is we need to set up this database to be a vector store. So the easiest way of doing this is going on the SQL editor. And in this page, which I'll link to in the toolkit, you can just copy this code, drop it in here, smash the run button, and that's done. So now if you go back to the table editor, we should see we've got a documents table, and this is all set up ready as a vector store. So we now need to connect our Supabase account to N8N. So if we go back to our workflow, double click on our Supabase node and create a new credential, we need a host and a service role secret. So to get these in Supabase, if you go to project settings, and then I believe we need to click Data API and get this URL as our host, we can then pop that in here. And then the service role secret is in the API key page. So if you click reveal that, copy, pop that in there, that should connect. That looks good. Then if we go out of there, then we should be able to select the documents table as our vector store. Now, one other thing we need to do is we need to download this file before sticking it in our vector store. So to do that, we're going to add a Google Drive download file action. And we're going to have to go through and set up a credential for Google Drive because the one we connected earlier was Google Docs, but we can reuse the same credentials that we used there. So if I go here, and if we go back to the Google Console project that we created earlier, we can copy our client ID, pop him in there, and then for the client secret, hopefully you copied that earlier, but if not, you can add 2 secrets on a web application in Google Console. So I'm just going to add a new one because I didn't copy it. We'll copy that, pop that in there, and then we'll sign in with Google, authenticate that, give it permissions. That should now work. So we can go out there and we're going to select the file from the previous node. So I'm going to give it an ID. So let's do that. So that will now download that file before sending it into our vector store. So we can run a little test and just make sure it is adding content into our vector store. So if I click execute workflow and we say, Gandalf, this is a test message, send that, that should run the workflow. So we can see it's doing its thing over here. There we go, sending it here. So it's creating the document, it's downloading the file, and we've got all green ticks, so it looks like it's embedded it. If we go to Supabase, we can see that it's added a new row in our vector store. And this is what I mean by the embedding the vector. You can see it's turned that content into basically a number, and that represents the content in that file. So all that's left to do now is give our research AI agent access to our vector store so it can reference those documents before it generates its response. So the same as giving it access to a calculator or Wikipedia, all we need to do is click add a tool, and we're going to search for our Supabase vector store, and we're going to give it access to that documents table, the one that we've embedded those files in. We can give it a description like use these research files to improve your response. You could obviously make this a little bit better. And the rest of these options we can just leave as is for now. I've created a separate video that goes a bit deeper into RAG agents that talks through some of these. Some of these are a good idea, like re-ranking, but at risk of this video getting any longer, we can leave them as they are for now. That's going to be absolutely fine. So we'll go out of that. And one last thing we need to do. So we need to add an embedding model to this vector store, same as what we did down here. And very important, this needs to be the identical embedding model to this one. Think of this as an unscrambler. It's basically working out how to unscramble those numbers and turn them back into text. So it needs to be the same one as this. So the easy thing to do here is to just click this and connect it to that node. If it looks tidier to you, you can add a separate OpenAI embedding node to this one. But I quite like connecting them to the same one just to sort of visually make sure they're using the same embedding model. And that's it. That's how you set up RAG in N8N. Okay, so it's the final lesson, and this is where all the magic happens. We're going to update our AI WhatsApp assistant so that it can build websites and web apps from a voice note. So Lovable have just quietly released this very underrated feature where we can now build web apps and websites from a URL. So my idea for this lesson is we're going to update our workflow so that if we say a certain code word in our initial WhatsApp message, it's going to, instead of going to our research agent and doing research, it's going to try and build a vibe coding prompt that fits into this URL and then send it to Lovable to build the web app. So if we go back to our workflow, I am going to add a new sticky note. This is going to be our web app building route. So first thing we need to do is add in a switch node to work out, are we trying to do research or are we trying to build an app? So let's add switch. And this is where you need to come up with your code word. So I'm going to pull in our original prompt and say, if it contains Jenkins, this is going to be an app build. If I do not say Leroy Jenkins, then we're doing research. So let's just do the opposite. Does not contain Jenkins, we are doing research. So that should work fine. We'll connect that up, that's the wrong one. So research goes to the research agent. Now we need to try and build this URL. So I'm going to copy this And first thing I'm going to do is add a set node. We're going to try and set this data. And let's call this our Lovable URL. I'm just going to pop that in like that for now. And we're going to move that up into our web building route. Now, you'll notice that the prompt here is encoded. So we need to find some way of taking the prompt that our prompt improver creates out of here, and we need to turn that into some encoded text. Now, I can't figure out a way of doing this without using a code node. If you know a way, then please let me know in the comments. But in this case, we are going to have to use the code node. So I'm going to run code in JavaScript. And I'm going to paste in this code here. Again, this will be in the N8N Toolkit. Now, while we're on the topic of code, if you run into a situation in N8N like this where you need code to get your workflow to work, unfortunately, this isn't going to work on the self-hosted version of N8N, but if you're on the cloud-hosted version, there's a really helpful node in N8N called AI Transform. And what you can do here is basically just tell this what you're trying to do, click generate code, and it's going to write the code for you. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, it works pretty well. Now, if you're on self-hosted N8N like we are today, you can do the exact same thing, but just by going to Claude or OpenAI and asking it to write you the code there and then popping it in here. So we've got our code. This is basically going to take our message and encode it into a URL. Okay, so we need to run our workflow to get some data to work with. So if I hit execute workflow, I'm going to give it quite a detailed prompt just so we give ourselves a good chance to get above a 7 out of 10 and send it up this route. So let's say, Leroy Jenkins, can you build a to-do list app like Todoist that is aimed at people who want to use GTD? It should be a web app that's mobile friendly, but not a mobile app. Ideally, build it in React, and it should integrate with my calendar and email. Let's give that a go. Hopefully that gives it enough information to get a 7 out of 10 and we go straight up this route, but it might ask some more questions. Okay, it wants a bit more detail. So we've got a 6 out of 10. It wants to know what specific GTD features we want and preferred authentication and a few other things. So let me go and give it a bit more information. Okay, it should integrate with Google Calendar and have bi-directional syncing, and it needs to have projects, inboxes, and all the standard GTD stuff. So send that. Okay, great. So we got above a 7 out of 10 and it's run these workflows. We can see that that code node has worked properly and it's embedded our prompt ready to go into the URL. So now if we go into this set node, we should be able to take out this example bit here and just drop in the encoded prompt at the end of our URL. Now, if we execute that step, it should just build that URL ready for us to go to or call so that it can then build our Lovable app. So this looks good to me. If I just test by going to Lovable, we can see that it's working pretty well. So it wants to know which workspace to build it in. If I click that, I'm guessing it should, yeah, it's going to go straight in and build that. So now we've got our URL ready to go. There's a few options of what we could do here. We could either connect this to WhatsApp, so it sends us the link and we click it and it starts building. The downside with that is that WhatsApp has a character limit and this URL is going to be absolutely enormous. I think when I was testing it, it was about 4,000 characters long. So that might be patchy. It might work sometimes, but cause issues if that URL gets a bit long. What I would probably recommend doing instead is adding an Airtable create record node and putting this URL into our research database. So we're already connected. We can just select that like this. And I'm going to take this URL and pop it in the open URL field. Now, again, you could map some of these bits here. So we can take the original prompt. We could take the research prompt, pop it there. We can also go to our prompt improver and take the revised prompt and put it there. Now, when we execute this, it's going to add a row in our Airtable. Hopefully that loads. There we go. And you can see it's got the prompt, it's got the response, and it's got the link that we can then click and do this. Now, if you want to get fancy, you could add an Airtable automation that automatically clicks that link when it gets added. But because this is going to use some of your Lovable credits by doing this, I think having a manual step where you go in and click it feels fairly prudent so that if there was a loop or some kind of abuse, it's not going to cost you all of your Lovable credits. So as one final test, I'm going to go to Airtable, click that link, and let's see what it builds. So let's run it. Hopefully I have enough Lovable credits for this to actually work. Let's see. Okay, it's doing its thing. Okay, so it's come back with this, and as far as I can see, this is exactly what I've asked for. This is a basic GTD to-do list app. It would of course need some refining, but as a first kind of starting point, this is pretty impressive. And the main point is that this came from a voice note. Remember, I didn't actually give it that much information. The prompt improver did a lot of the heavy lifting and built this URL for us. So if we go back to our N8N workflow, we've covered a huge amount of ground in this tutorial. We've built AI agents, we've connected WhatsApp, Google Docs, Airtable, Supabase, we've built a RAG agent, we've built this web app building route, this research database. And the reason why I chose all these is because these teach so many of the core principles that are important when learning N8N. Now, congratulations on finishing this full N8N course. I do have one bonus lesson for you in a second, which will teach you how to build apps in Lovable that use N8N as a backend. But first, if you found this course useful or have any feedback at all, I'd love to hear in the comments. Now, the most powerful aspect of N8N is the ability to build tools that use N8N as a backend. This takes you beyond automating workflows to being able to build entire products. So in the next video, I'll walk through how to create a front-end web app in Lovable that uses N8N as the backend. So again, well done completing this course, and see you in the next video.